All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. So we're here in the garage today. We're working on this project car. This is the 2013 Tesla Model S 85 rear-wheel drive. I picked this up a couple weeks ago and just kind of doing an assessment, trying to see what this car needs to kind of get it up to kind of get it all sorted out. There is a clunk in the driveline in the front. The brakes are horrible on this thing. I don't think there's any pad left on any four of the calipers. I think the pads are all worn down. The rotors are completely scored. On this backside passenger one, it's like there's like a huge groove inside of it. So that might be a cause of some of the noise I'm getting while I'm driving. I want to replace all the brakes. I'm also replacing the hubs, the hub bearing assembly. The fronts are easy because there's no axle that comes out. I'm just going to replace that. While I'm in here taking apart the rotor and the caliper, it makes sense to do these if I suspect they might be bad. That might be cause of some of the noise as well. So I'm going to make sure that those hub bearings are all new and refreshed, so that's going to help. First off, I want to break the lug nuts loose. The fronts have different lug nuts than the rears. These are a solid lug nut here, and in the rear, these actually have these caps. So if you can see, it looks like the lug nut fills up the entire space there. Just get some needle nose pliers, and you can pull those off, and there's an open-ended lug nut. These are 21 millimeters. The fronts look like they're a little bit bigger, like a 22. So I'm just going to crack them loose. We'll get it jacked up. These lug nuts in the front are super stripped out. I can't even get... I have to pound on the socket, and I'm going to have to crank them off, and then I'm just going to have to replace them. Not that big of a deal to replace them, but you just want to make sure I can get these off. I don't want these to be stuck on there. Just one of the lug nuts I taken out. These have these aluminum covers over the top of them, and they get all marred up. See how there's just like... They're not square... The sides are not squared off, and so they really get marred up, and they get to a point where you can't take them off. So these are, if you have these on your car, replace these. I'm just going to get a set of aftermarket ones. They're going to be black. I'm going to get black wheels on here, so these are just going to be thrown away. All right, I'm using these lifting pucks. They have a little knob that goes into the... There's a couple holes on these older Model S's. Right under here, there's 3 holes. This can go in there, and I'll use this as my jacking point. I've got my one floor jack here. So there's only 4 jacking points to my knowledge. One's there, and then the same on the other side. It's hard to get a jack stand on the same place that you're trying to jack from. So that's why I'm just going to do one side at a time with floor jacks. First off, I need to remove these pins. These pins pop out right here on the side of the caliper. You got to push those out from the back, so get a punch, pound those out. This clip comes off, set those aside. I didn't bend these are reusable. I want to get these all cleaned up so they'll slide in nice. So before I start spreading the calipers, pushing the pistons back on the calipers, I want to take this front cowl area off. I wiped off this area, make sure this is nice and clean, and then I want to remove the cap for the fluid. I'm just getting this pry tool between the rotor and the pad and then pressing against it so that way it's pushing the piston back in. This is the outer pad. It has that clip on the bottom there. Okay, that inner pad. I've got a paint can down here. When I take the caliper off, I'm gonna rest it on a paint can so that way it's not putting any strain on the brake line. 2 18mm bolts behind the caliper here. I am using an impact wrench because it's kind of tight clearance and they're hard to get to, and they're on there pretty tight. All right, I zip those bolts off. Take them off, and I'm setting that down. All right, let's get off this brake rotor, 45. Now, oftentimes this rotor is kind of seized onto the hub, so I'm just gonna get a mallet and just pound on different sides of this, and it'll break the corrosion on that, and it'll pop off. So again, this is a rear-wheel drive car. This doesn't have any axle up front, so this is an easier procedure. There's 4 18mm bolts behind this to hold it on to the knuckle. The sway bar end link is in the way of getting to these this bottom one right here. So what I have to do, this whole knuckle will fold forward if I take off this top upper control arm out of the knuckle, and it comes out actually pretty easily. A T50 Torx bit here, and then just put a wrench on here. I back that nut all the way out, this bolt all the way out, and then this control arm just pops out. All right, 15mm on the nut, 50 Torx bit here, and this you need to pull all the way out. If you leave it in, this won't come out. If I just tap that, it'll come out. On the back of the knuckle is where the sway bar end link connects. That's also a 15mm. I'm just gonna back that out. So for the sway bar end link on the back of the knuckle, a 15mm socket and then a 5mm Allen hex bolt to hold it so it doesn't spin, and then just back that nut off. Sway bar end link is removed from the knuckle, so now this knuckle can move around. And I want to take off, this is the ABS sensor here. I do want to take this one out, and that way it'll be able to, see how it can fold all the way down. All right, with this knuckle now pushed forward, I can get this impact driver back behind here, 18mm to take off the hub. Once I take all those bolts out, this thing just falls right out. I'm gonna get this area cleaned up a little bit, just get a wire brush on here, clean off inside here, and then I can just bolt the new one on. Okay, just lining the hub up and gonna start the screws by hand, and then once they're in, I'm gonna finish them off with the impact. And getting a torque wrench just to torque these down to spec. All right, this hub back on, it's all torqued down. I just gotta get the sway bar end link and then the upper control arm bolted back on. You get like a pry tool, lodge it into the spring, and that gives you some leverage to push it down. And then that. I'm gonna put it on backwards. That way I can degrease the back side of it. Get a clean rag. They come with this grease and oil all over them so they don't rust. Flip it around. I want to make sure I line up the hold screw hole on the hub. Okay, the caliper's back on, just two 18mm bolts behind these, get those torqued down. Now I can put the pads in, the pins through the pads, and the retaining clip. Just putting the new pads in, I'm gonna get some brake caliper grease. I'm gonna grease up the piston points here, the back of the pad. Get those slipped in. This clip on the pad, this goes on the bottom. And just lubricating the pads and where the pads are gonna be sitting on the caliper. Pad slid in there. I now want to insert my pin to the top here. All right, so here you want to get the spring in underneath the pin and then push the spring in as you're pushing this pin into position right here. You want to guide it into this hole right here and then just tap it from behind and get it nice and seated. This is the rear driver's side. I already did the passenger side. It needs new rotors. We're going to do new hub bearing assembly. We're going to do new brake pads, and I'm going to service the parking brake here. I'm going to take these, put new pads in, new pins, new hardware. This thing's really been neglected. The pads were really hard to get out. One thing I haven't shown yet, but I already did, is there's two pins, a pin that goes across each side here. I had to grind those off with an angle grinder, cut those off here, punch them out. So that's kind of step one, is punch those out, get the old pads out. I'm at that point now. So what I want to do is I want to get the caliper off, 18mm bolts here, one down below, two of those. And then I want to get this parking brake off. You need to be in tow mode, so that way it releases the parking brake, and then 16mm bolts on the back of this, I'll take that off. I'll be able to unclip my connector here, take this off, and then I'll be able to see if I can punch these pins out. If not, I'm going to have to open this up and take the bolt out and then angle grind these, cut these off, punch them out. And this is a 32mm. This is the hub nut. So I'm gonna get all that done. So the caliper's off. It's just resting on this little box right here. You want to make sure you're not putting any pressure on the line. Now to get this parking brake off, there's two bolts, 16mm, one here and one here. I got my impact with a stubby socket, and I was able to get it up through here and then just back those off. Those are very stubborn, they're hard to get to. So now with this, because I'm in park mode, this is not clamped, which is what you want. I have a really thick lip, see on this rotor. So what I want to do is I'm going to get my angle grinder, I'm going to grind off a section of this lip. Pop off here. The pads on this actually are not too bad a shape. I'm still going to replace them because I have a whole new set, but I need to unplug this. There's some tape around the electrical connection. You have to squeeze the connection and then pull it off. So I'm going to cut the tape off, pull that electrical connection off. So I got the parking brake off. I got the rotor off after I had to grind down each of the edges. It is a little challenging to get this clip off, but now I need to get this hub bearing assembly replaced. There's 4 bolts that are required to remove. And they're on the 2 on the top here, 2 on the bottom. In order to get to those, I have to take the whole knuckle off. So that's going to be the challenge here, is taking off all of these suspension linkage parts. So there's the shock. There's a couple arms that I'm taking off, loosening the control arm, taking off the bottom connection. So taking that whole part off and then removing the knuckle altogether to be able to get to the bolts behind it. These linkages are out, all the bolts for all these connections here. I just got to get this maybe ABS or speed sensor here. 30 Torx bit there. Take that out, and then I just tap on the axle to get that free from the splines, and then this whole knuckle should pull out. Okay, the knuckle's off, and there's the 4 bolts back behind here. 18 millimeters socket. We're just gonna zip those off, and then I'm gonna get this thing kind of cleaned up. I'm gonna get a wire brush to it, just kind of clean up some of the corrosion off it, and we'll get the new hub put back on. All right, I got the hub bearing replaced here. It's ready to be put back on. Just 4 bolts, bolted that on. And one key to getting this whole knuckle back on is I had to relieve or loosen up all of these connections. So they're basically all 18 millimeters except this one. That one's a 19, but all the rest 18. And then the 2 on the control arm are all 18. Just loosen those a little bit so that way it drops all the way down, because this strut, otherwise this strut is not going to allow you to get it back in. So I'm not going to put the axle nut on all the way. I'm just going to put it on very loosely for right now until I get all of the connections connected back in, the knuckle on, and then I can tighten down the nut. So when you're putting the knuckle back here, what I ended up doing is doing the bottom bolt first, and then I did the shock mount here. This one's the hardest because this shock wants to stay extended the whole time. Now once you get that, I use the jack under here to lift up the hub just to move this into place, and I was able to get this into place, this one, and this one into place there. So that's kind of the order you want to do that. I have that propped up. The spring's compressed a little bit. I want to go back now and tighten up all the connections that I loosened. So that, and then the 2 connections on the control arm. Tighten those bolts up with a little pressure on it. I can go back and torque all the rest of these bolts down. All right, I got all my suspension components tightened down, torqued down. I got my speed sensor put back in. I just need to now, final step, I'm just gonna get this axle nut tightened down. I'm gonna tighten down my impact driver, my impact wrench, and when I get it on the ground, while the weight of the car's on the wheel, I'm gonna then torque it down. Then I can get my disc on, I can get my caliper, and then I can then start working on my parking brake, getting my new pads, pins, and that as well. So I'm ready to put the caliper back on. I just need to get it cleaned up. I'm gonna hit it with some brake cleaner. Wire brush tool, I have them for my drill. I'm just gonna go in here and clean off the corners. That's where it really gets gummed up. You wanna make sure you get that nice and cleaned off, and then lubricate the pads up in this area. Caliper's put back on. Now I need to put the pads in. And this is an important step. When you're putting pads in, you need to make sure you lubricate the pads. So the top slide here, put a little on the back where the piston's gonna touch it. So I'm just gonna put that in there. And you wanna make sure that the piston is compressed. Those pistons on the caliper, this has a 4-piston caliper, and it's gonna press over time, and then you just need to compress them back. Using a new hardware set. This I got, you can get this with the pads or you buy it separately. Mine didn't come with it. I had to buy this separately, but a lot of times these pins get all corroded and you can't reuse them. I had to cut mine to get them out, so these I can't be reused. So you push this in from the back. This little tab, this little collar here will squeeze into the hole. So we're just gonna put it in from the back here. And once I get that one pounded in, I can then put my clip in. My clip goes in, and then the second pin will go down on the bottom. All right, once you get the parking brake off, there's 3 screws right here all around the edge. 1, 2, 3. Remove those. This should pop off. Mine had corrosion in there, and I had to really like get like a chisel and pound it in there. You can kind of see where I hit this, but it took a lot of effort to get that out. There is an O-ring in here, so I cleaned up the corrosion here. I sprayed some like WD-40 in there just to make sure those gears are kind of lubricated. And now I've got to get these pins out. I'm going to actually cut these pins because there is some corrosion on these pins, therefore they're not going to slide all the way out. They actually slide out this way here. And I'm going to use a jigsaw, the metal cutoff blade, to cut these pins right here, here, and here, and I'll be able to get these old pads out. All right, the jigsaw cut through this really easily. So I'll cut those cut out and the pad should just fall down. Look how this one's all rusted up. It's got chip marks on the edge. This one needs to be replaced. Just need to get like a punch that will allow those to come out. All right, these pins came out really easily. 3 of them came out without even having to use the punch. The one that was sticking out just a little bit, I just pounded it out and it just came right out easy. So I don't have to take this apart because taking apart would only be required if you can't get these out and you have to like separate this and really pound them out. But I really like that jigsaw method where you just cut it right next to the caliper, and that way there's barely any pin left and it'll pop right out easily. And these ones are actually pretty corroded. I put the motor on here. I ended up breaking off my clip a little bit, but these prongs are still there. Make sure your electrical connectors are kind of straight. This, I even tested out. This will still clip on. I'm just gonna use some electrical tape just to keep any moisture out of this. Before you put the motor on, you want to make sure that you get this little screw right here on the back of the caliper. You want to retract it so it retracts the piston. Therefore, the new pads will fit over the new rotor. 3 screws back in. I'm going to get this mounted, and then I'll be able to put my new pins and pads in. All right, a little bit of hiccup getting this parking brake reinstalled. I got it put back on here. It's held on by these 2 bolts. There's bolts behind here, 2 of them. Here's the holes that these go in. These are threaded areas. The bolts are kind of these long bolts like this. I got this side in, and then when I got to this side, I torqued it down too much, and I snapped the bolt off, and I had to use this bolt. Luckily, there was some exposed still here, and I was able to use this bolt extractor to get the end of it off. And then I had to go down to the Tesla service center and get a new bolt. Luckily, it was only $1.28 for a new bolt, but it was a hassle. Like it delayed me a couple days because it was over the weekend. They weren't open. I had to get a new bolt. Had to figure out how to get it extracted. Be careful putting these back in. You don't want to over torque these. They will snap off. Now I have my new bolt here. I'm going to get it put back in, and I'll be able to snap my pads in, put my new bolts in, and we'll be ready to wrap this up. Just to quickly show you, this is the old caliper. I had to replace one on the passenger side because I stripped the bolts out of this one. I couldn't get this off. I couldn't get this piston retracted. So I found a new one. I found a used one that I ordered. And how these pads, you can kind of see on this how the pads go in. The pads just go in. They just drop in here like this on both sides. The new pins just go through. This collar goes through the front right here, and it gets pounded into this side right here. And then the new clip, you can see this one already has the old clip on. The clip goes in like that. You want to make sure that you just get them pounded in enough to where the pin, the collar on this pin goes in so it's inset a little bit like that. It's pretty straightforward. And then it'll automatically adjust once you turn the parking brake on, turn off the tow mode. The caliper will automatically squeeze the rotor, and it'll automatically adjust to the new width of the rotor and the new pads. These are the lug nuts that I use. These are the aftermarket lug nuts. I'll leave a link to these, but I was going to do the wheels black. That's still a project to come, but I got black lug nuts. These fit on really good. They work well, and they replace those marred up, stripped out factory ones that I had on there. So I got the brake job all wrapped up on this. I got these new hub bearing assemblies on there. So guys, hopefully this was helpful or informational if you're looking to do this yourself. People say that Teslas are maintenance free. Guys, this isn't the case. The person that owned this car last, they lived in a harsh climate. They never serviced these brakes. They never took those pins out. A lot of corrosion. And if I was to take this to Tesla, they would have recommended to replace all of the calipers as well as the brake calipers, and it probably would have been like a $4,000 or $5,000 job, I bet. I probably spent about $600 or $700 doing this because I did have to replace, all of the parts, but also the rear brake parking brake, I had to replace one of those, and that was about $150. So it is best, guys, to make sure that you're doing this on a regular basis, where you're taking those pins out, lubricating the pads, making sure you're getting that corrosion off those pins, so that way that when it comes time to change the pads, it's not going to be a huge project like this. But after taking this on a test drive, it fixed a lot of the noises in this car. The grinding noises have gone away. I still have a clunking sound in this. And I was working recently on getting the like the MCU screen and the instrument cluster gauge screen replaced. I put in a new one, and the MCUs wouldn't turn on, and somehow my app's not communicating with it. The key's inside the car's locked. I can't get into this car. I'm kind of stranded with this car, so I got to figure out something. So guys, the saga continues with the project, high mileage Tesla Model S. I am glad I got the brakes working, so it is going to be more drivable now. We just got to now get it working. We just took all the PPF off the hood, so we got to get all that off. So guys, there's more projects to come on this. Got a lot more things. Be sure to stay tuned to the channel. I'll leave links to the videos. I got the brake calipers painted. I bled all the brakes. Those are 2 separate videos. Those will be linked down below. But guys, leave your comments down below. Hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.